Boyfriend told me his gaming tournament was more important than my job interview that could change our future, so I quietly started making other plans, and when he finally noticed something was wrong, I showed him exactly where his priorities had gotten him. So this happened about a month ago, and I'm still getting messages from him and his gaming buddies about how I overreacted and ruined everything, but honestly I think I handled this perfectly and I don't see why everyone thinks I'm the villain here. My boyfriend Derek and I have been together for almost 3 years. We're both 27 and up until everything went down I thought we had a solid future together. We've been living together for about a year and a half in this apartment that I basically pay for since Derek's income from streaming and occasional tournament winnings is pretty inconsistent. Derek is really into competitive gaming, like this is his whole identity. He plays this battle royale game professionally, or at least he thinks he does. He's got a decent following on his streaming platform, maybe like 15,000 followers, and he makes enough money from donations and sponsorships to cover maybe 30% of our monthly expenses. The rest comes from my job as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized company downtown. Derek's always talking about making it big in gaming and how he's going to be the next huge streamer, but after 3 years of watching him play the same game for 8 to 12 hours a day, I'm starting to think maybe he needs a backup plan. The thing about Derek is that he takes his gaming extremely seriously, like more seriously than most people take their actual careers. He has this whole routine where he wakes up at noon, practices for 6 hours, streams for 4 hours, and then usually stays up until 3 or 4 a.m. playing ranked matches with his teammates Marcus, Kyle, and Jordan. These guys are basically his entire social circle and they all live in this weird bubble where they think they're going to be professional gamers forever, even though none of them have ever won anything significant. I've always been supportive of Derek's gaming because I figured everyone needs hobbies and dreams, right? And when we first started dating, his passion was actually kind of attractive, he was so dedicated and driven about something he cared about. But over the past year, I've started to feel like I'm living with someone who has completely checked out of real life. Derek doesn't help with household stuff, doesn't contribute much financially, and basically treats our apartment like his personal gaming house where I'm just the person who pays the bills and brings him food. The situation that changed everything started about 6 months ago when I found out that my company was opening a new branch in Seattle and they were looking for someone to head up the marketing department for the new location. This would have been a massive promotion for me, like going from marketing coordinator to marketing director plus a 40% salary increase and the opportunity to build a department from scratch. It was literally my dream job and I've been working towards something like this for years. When I first told Derek about the opportunity, he seemed excited. He said it sounded great and that he was proud of me for being considered. But then when I explained that it would mean moving to Seattle, he got this weird look on his face and started asking questions about whether I really wanted to leave our city and whether I thought it was worth disrupting our life here. I told him it was worth it because this kind of opportunity doesn't come around often, and the salary increase would mean we could actually save money and maybe buy a house eventually. That's when Derek started acting strange about the whole thing. He kept making comments about how Seattle was expensive and how he didn't know anyone there and how it would be hard for him to build a streaming audience in a new city. I pointed out that streaming is literally done from your computer so geography shouldn't matter, but he said it was more complicated than that because of time zones and networking and all this stuff that honestly sounded like excuses to me. The application process for the Seattle position was intense. They wanted portfolio samples, writing samples, references, and multiple rounds of interviews including a presentation to the executive team about my vision for the new marketing department. I spent weeks preparing for this thing, working on it every evening after my regular job and most of the weekend. Derek was supportive at first. He'd bring me coffee while I was working and tell me he believed in me, but as the process went on and it became more real that I might actually get the job, he started getting weird about it. About a month before my final interview, Derek found out that there was this big gaming tournament happening the same weekend as my interview. It wasn't just any tournament, apparently it was some major event with a significant prize pool and all the top streamers and professional teams were going to be there. Derek was absolutely obsessed with this tournament. He spent weeks trying to get his team qualified and practicing for like 14 hours a day. When they finally got accepted to participate, he was over the moon. Here's where things started getting really problematic. The tournament was happening in Las Vegas the same weekend as my final interview in Seattle. Derek assumed I would just reschedule my interview to accommodate his tournament. When I explained that you can't just reschedule final interviews with executive teams, he got annoyed and said surely they would understand that I had a family obligation that weekend. I told him it wasn't a family obligation, it was his hobby, and that this interview was potentially life-changing for both of us. Derek got defensive and said gaming wasn't just a hobby for him, it was his career, and this tournament was a major opportunity that could lead to sponsorships and recognition. I reminded him that he'd been saying that about tournaments for 3 years and nothing had ever come of it, and that meanwhile I had a concrete job offer that could actually change our financial situation. He said I was being unsupportive and that I didn't understand how important this was for his future. The week leading up to both events was absolutely terrible. Derek was practicing constantly and getting more and more stressed about the tournament. He kept talking about strategy and team coordination and how this could be their big break. Meanwhile, I was trying to finalize my presentation and prepare for the most important interview of my career, but Derek was so consumed with his tournament that he couldn't even pretend to care about what I was going through. 3 days before the interview, Derek's teammate Marcus called and said he might not be able to make it to the tournament because his girlfriend was having some kind of family emergency. Derek absolutely lost his mind. He spent hours on the phone with the team trying to figure out if they could find a substitute player and what their options were. He was pacing around the apartment ranting about how Marcus was ruining everything and how they'd been preparing for months. That evening I asked Derek if he could help me practice my presentation since I was scheduled to present to the executive team the next Friday. Derek said he couldn't focus on anything else right now because the tournament situation was too stressful. I told him I understood he was stressed, but I really needed his support right now too since this interview was happening in 2 days. That's when he said something that made my blood run cold. He looked at me and said, "Look, I know your interview is important, but my tournament is more important to me right now because it's actually happening this weekend. Your interview might lead to a job, but my tournament could lead to my whole career taking off." I just stared at him because I couldn't believe he had actually said that out loud. I asked him if he really thought his gaming tournament was more important than the job interview that could secure our financial future. Derek doubled down and said yes, because my job interview was just one opportunity, but his tournament was the opportunity he'd been working toward for 3 years. He said I would have other chances for promotions, but this tournament was a once-in-a-lifetime shot. I pointed out that he'd said the exact same thing about at least 5 other tournaments in the past 2 years, and he got angry and said this one was different. That's when I realized Derek genuinely believed that his gaming career was more important than my actual career, not just to him personally, but objectively more important. He saw my job as just something I did to pay bills while his gaming was his real passion and therefore more worthy of prioritization and support. I told him I couldn't believe he was serious, and he said I was being dramatic and that I should understand that sometimes we have to prioritize the things that matter most. I asked him where our relationship ranked on his list of priorities, and he said our relationship was important but it wasn't going anywhere so he could focus on that later. Right now he needed to focus on his tournament because it was time sensitive. Our relationship would still be there next week, but this tournament wouldn't be. I just stood there processing what he had said, and I realized he had just told me that our relationship was something he could put on the back burner whenever something more exciting came along. That night I made a decision. If Derek wanted to prioritize his tournament over everything else in his life, including me and our future, then he could do that, but I wasn't going to stick around to subsidize his gaming hobby while he treated me like I was optional. I started making plans quietly. I looked up the cost of flights to Seattle and realized I could afford to fly out there for my interview even if it meant putting it on a credit card. The next morning Derek left early to go to Kyle's house for a final practice session before they drove to Las Vegas. I called in sick to work and spent the day making arrangements. I booked a flight to Seattle scheduled for Thursday evening, moved money around to make sure I could cover rent and utilities for the next few months without Derek's contribution, and started researching apartments in Seattle just in case I got the job. When Derek came home that evening, he was in a great mood. Apparently practice had gone well and Marcus had confirmed he could make it to the tournament after all. Derek was talking about their strategy and how confident he felt about their chances. I listened to him talk for about 20 minutes about gaming strategy and tournament brackets, and when he finally paused I told him I was flying to Seattle the next day for my interview. Derek looked confused and asked why I was flying when I could just drive. It's only like a 4-hour drive. I told him I wanted to get there early and have time to prepare without distractions. He asked what I meant by distractions, and I said I meant him being stressed about his tournament and not being able to focus on anything else. He seemed to think this was reasonable and said that was probably smart since he was going to be pretty distracted this week. The next day I flew to Seattle, and I have to say it felt amazing to be somewhere where I could focus entirely on my interview without Derek's gaming drama in the background. I spent Thursday evening walking around the city and visualizing myself living there, working at this new job, and building a life that was actually moving forward. Friday morning I nailed my interview. I absolutely crushed it. The presentation went perfectly, the executive team asked great questions, and I could tell they were impressed. By the end of the meeting they told me they were very interested and I should expect to hear from them within a week. Meanwhile, Derek was in Las Vegas with his team and from what I could see on social media, they were having a great time. They posted photos from restaurants and bars and Derek was streaming from their hotel room talking about how excited he was for the tournament. I watched a little bit of his stream and he seemed completely in his element, surrounded by his teammates, talking about the game and strategy. He looked happier than I'd seen him in months. Here's the thing though, while Derek was living his best life in Vegas, completely absorbed in his tournament, I was having this incredible realization about what it felt like to be somewhere where my goals and priorities were actually valued. I spent the weekend exploring Seattle, meeting with a realtor, and imagining what my life would look like if I took this job, and I realized I felt more excited about my future than I had in years. Derek's tournament didn't go well. They got eliminated in the first round. Apparently, there was some drama with their team coordination and they made some strategic errors that cost them the match. Derek was devastated. He called me Saturday night from Vegas almost in tears, talking about how disappointed he was and how they'd prepared so hard for nothing. I tried to be supportive and told him there would be other tournaments, but he said this one was supposed to be different. When Derek got back from Vegas on Sunday, he was in a terrible mood. He spent most of the day rewatching footage from their matches and analyzing what went wrong. I asked him how he was feeling and he said he was frustrated because they'd put so much time and energy into preparing and it felt like it was all wasted. I pointed out that sometimes things don't work out the way we plan them even when we prepare really hard, and he said I didn't understand because I'd never put myself on the line like that for something I really cared about. That comment bothered me because I had literally just put myself on the line for something I cared about, my interview in Seattle, but Derek had been so focused on his tournament that he hadn't even asked me how it went. I waited to see if he would remember to ask about my interview, but Sunday evening came and went without him mentioning it. Monday morning I was getting ready for work and Derek was already back to his normal routine of sleeping until noon and getting ready to start practicing. I was putting on my makeup when Derek finally asked, "Oh hey, how did your interview thing go on Friday?" I looked at him in the mirror and said it went really well. They said they were very interested and I should hear back within a week. Derek said, "That's great," and then immediately started talking about how he wanted to analyze what went wrong with their tournament strategy. I realized he had asked about my interview just to check a box, not because he actually cared about the answer. That week was weird. Derek was back to his normal schedule, but he was more focused on gaming than ever because he said he needed to figure out what went wrong in Vegas and improve for next time. Meanwhile, I was anxiously waiting to hear back about the Seattle job and trying to process everything that had happened the weekend before. I kept thinking about how different I felt when I was in Seattle, focused on my own goals without Derek's gaming drama taking up all the oxygen in the room. Wednesday afternoon I got the call. I got the job. They offered me the position with an even higher salary than initially discussed and they wanted me to start in 3 weeks. I was so excited I could barely contain myself. I called Derek immediately to tell him the good news. Derek answered the phone while he was in the middle of a ranked match and said congratulations, but could he call me back because he was in an important game. I hung up and just sat there staring at my phone. I had just gotten the biggest career opportunity of my life and my boyfriend couldn't even pause his video game to have a conversation about it. That's when I realized nothing was ever going to change. Derek was always going to prioritize gaming over everything else, including me, and I was always going to come second to whatever tournament or streaming goal he was currently obsessed with. I decided not to tell Derek about the timeline for the new job. Instead, I spent the rest of the week making plans. I found an apartment in Seattle that I could afford on my new salary. I arranged for movers to come the following Monday when Derek would be at Kyle's house practicing. And I started packing my personal belongings little by little when Derek wasn't paying attention, which was most of the time since he was back to his 12-hour gaming days. Derek finally called me back Thursday evening to talk about the job offer. He said he was really proud of me and asked about the details. When I told him about the salary and the timeline, he got quiet and then asked what this meant for us. I told him it meant I was moving to Seattle to start my new job and that he was welcome to come with me if he wanted to, but I understood that it might interfere with his gaming career. Derek said he couldn't just move to Seattle because it would mess up his whole routine and his team and his streaming schedule. He asked if I could negotiate a later start date so we could figure things out. I told him the start date wasn't negotiable and that I'd already accepted the position. Derek got frustrated and said I was making a huge decision without considering how it would affect him. I reminded him that he had done the exact same thing when he chose his tournament over my interview. That's when Derek said something that perfectly summarized our entire relationship dynamic. He said, "But my tournament was just one weekend, this job thing is permanent." I told him that was exactly the problem. He saw his priorities as temporary inconveniences that I should just work around, while my priorities were permanent disruptions to his life. He genuinely couldn't understand why I wouldn't just turn down this incredible opportunity to accommodate his gaming schedule. I told Derek I was taking the job and moving to Seattle with or without him. He said I was being unfair and forcing him to choose between me and his gaming career. I pointed out that I had never asked him to choose, I had simply stopped making myself smaller to accommodate his choices. Derek said it wasn't the same thing because gaming was his passion, his potential career, while my job was just a job. The next few days were tense. Derek kept trying to convince me to negotiate with the Seattle company or to find a job in a city that was closer to our current location. He suggested I look for opportunities in Portland or San Francisco since they were closer to his teammates and wouldn't require as big of a lifestyle change for him. Every conversation we had reinforced my decision to take the job and move on from our relationship. Monday morning, while Derek was at Kyle's house, I had the movers come and pack up all my belongings. I left most of the furniture since Derek would need it and I could afford to buy new stuff with my salary increase. I wrote Derek a letter explaining that I was taking the job and that I thought it was best if we ended our relationship. I told him he was a good person but that we clearly had incompatible priorities and approaches to building a future together. I drove to Seattle Monday afternoon and started my new life. Derek didn't even realize I had moved out until he came home Monday evening and found the letter. I had left my phone turned off because I needed time to settle in and get oriented without dealing with the drama I knew would follow. Tuesday morning, I turned my phone back on to find 47 missed calls and about 30 text messages from Derek. The messages started out confused and hurt, asking where I was and why I had left without talking to him first, but by the end they were angry, accusing me of abandoning our relationship and ruining his life. Derek said he couldn't afford the apartment without my income and that I was being selfish and vindictive by leaving him in a bad financial situation. I didn't respond to most of the messages, but I did send one text explaining that I had paid the next 2 months of rent to give him time to figure out his living situation. After that, it was up to him. Derek kept calling and texting for the next 2 weeks, asking me to come back and saying we could work things out. He said he had been thinking about what I said and that maybe he could move to Seattle after all and we could start fresh there. I told him I appreciated the offer but that I had already started building a new life and I was happy with my decision. Derek got upset and said I was giving up on 3 years together over one disagreement about priorities. That's when Marcus got involved. Apparently Derek had been telling his gaming friends that I had left him out of nowhere because I was jealous of his gaming success. Marcus sent me a long message about how Derek was devastated and how I was being cruel by not giving him another chance. He said Derek had learned his lesson and just needed an opportunity to prove that he could change. I responded to Marcus explaining that this wasn't about one disagreement or jealousy about gaming success, it was about fundamental incompatibility in how we approached priorities and life goals. I said Derek had made it clear that gaming would always come first and I had decided I wanted to be with someone who valued building a future together. Marcus said I was being dramatic and that all couples have to compromise. The thing is, I had been compromising for 3 years. I had been paying most of our expenses while Derek pursued his gaming dreams. I had been understanding when he couldn't help with household responsibilities because he needed to practice. I had been supportive when he spent entire weekends at tournaments or gaming events. But when it came time for him to support my career goals, he literally told me his tournament was more important than my future. It's been a month now and I absolutely love my new life in Seattle. The job is challenging and rewarding, my new colleagues are amazing, and I'm finally building the kind of career I always wanted. I found a great apartment with a view of the water and I've started exploring the city and making new friends. Derek still messages me occasionally asking if I'm ready to talk about working things out, but honestly there's nothing left to work out. Last week Derek's teammate Kyle reached out to tell me that Derek had to move back in with his parents because he couldn't afford the apartment on his own. Kyle said Derek was really struggling with the breakup and that he finally understood how much I had been contributing to our relationship financially and emotionally. Kyle asked if I would consider giving Derek another chance since he had learned from his mistakes. I told Kyle I was glad Derek was learning and growing, but that didn't change the fact that we wanted different things from life. Derek wants to spend his 20s and potentially his 30s pursuing gaming dreams while I want to build a stable career and plan for the future. Those aren't compatible goals and there's nothing wrong with either approach, but they don't work together in a relationship. The funny thing is that several people have told me I was too harsh and that I should have given Derek more time to adjust to the idea of moving. But Derek had 3 years to show me that he could prioritize our relationship and our future together. Instead, he consistently chose gaming over everything else, including me. When I finally stopped accepting that treatment and started making decisions based on what was best for me, suddenly I was the bad guy. I don't regret my decision at all. I'm happier now than I've been in years. I have a job I love in a city I'm excited to explore, and I'm building a life based on my own goals and priorities instead of constantly accommodating someone else's dreams. Derek is a good person and I hope he finds success in gaming or whatever he ends up pursuing, but I wasn't willing to put my life on hold indefinitely while he figured it out. Some people think I was wrong to leave without more discussion, but I had been trying to discuss our incompatible priorities for months. Derek had made it clear that gaming would always come first and I had decided I wanted something different. There wasn't really anything left to discuss. Sometimes you have to trust people when they show you who they are and what matters to them. Derek showed me that I would always come second to gaming, and I believed him. Update 1. So Derek found this post somehow. I'm not sure if one of his gaming friends saw it or if he was looking for relationship advice online, but he called me absolutely furious yesterday demanding to know why I was sharing our personal business with strangers and making him look bad. I told him I hadn't used real names and that I just wanted outside perspective on the situation. Derek said it didn't matter because anyone who knew us would recognize the story and that I was trying to make him look like a bad boyfriend to justify leaving him. What's interesting is that he was more upset about the post than he had ever been about the actual relationship problems. He spent 20 minutes yelling at me about how embarrassed he was that people were calling him selfish and immature, but he didn't spend any time actually addressing the issues I had raised. Then he said something that really confirmed I made the right decision. He said, "I can't believe you're letting a bunch of strangers on the internet convince you that 3 years meant nothing." I told him that strangers on the internet didn't convince me of anything, his own words and actions did. I said that if he was more concerned about how he looked to random people online than he was about how he had treated me in our relationship, that pretty much proved my point. Derek hung up on me but then texted me later asking if we could meet in person to talk without an audience. I told him there wasn't anything left to talk about and that I was focused on my new life in Seattle. That's when he said he had been thinking about moving to Seattle too and maybe we could try again. I told him that ship had sailed and that I hoped he found happiness, but it wouldn't be with me. The next day Marcus, Kyle, and Jordan all started messaging me saying I was being too harsh and that Derek had learned from his mistakes. They said he was really struggling financially and emotionally since I left and that he deserved another chance. I told them I wasn't responsible for Derek's financial or emotional well-being and that if they were such good friends, they should help him figure out his life instead of trying to convince me to come back. What really sealed the deal for me was finding out from Kyle's girlfriend that Derek had been telling people a completely different version of our breakup. According to her, Derek was saying that I had gotten jealous of his gaming success and given him an ultimatum to choose between me and his career. When he wouldn't quit gaming, I left him. That's not remotely what happened, but it shows me that Derek still doesn't understand or won't admit what he actually did wrong. I think I'm done engaging with this whole situation. Derek can tell whatever version makes him feel better, but I know what really happened and I'm comfortable with my decision. I'm building an amazing life in Seattle and I refuse to let Derek's inability to take responsibility drag me backward. Sometimes the best thing you can do is trust yourself and move forward, even when other people don't understand your choices.